Okay, so really happy that this week we have Nicola Field presenting to us with a presentation called Doom and Trauma, Finding Forms for Queer Life Writing. I believe that's the title. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Nicola.
Okay, so, bear with me, everybody. It's the first time I've done PowerPoint, and Kate's supporting me to get the thing on screen. So, and I hope, is that successfully taking up the whole of the screen?
That's looking great.
Okay, thank you so much. Right, now I need to be able to see the chat so I can, that's not going to work, is it? Okay, well, occasionally I shall go like that to see. Oh no, I clicked this to see the chat, wouldn't I?
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat if you want to take questions at the end, and I can monitor.
Yeah, there's a question in the middle. There's a question in the middle, but what I'll do is I'll just ask people to shout out because it'll be quite easy to do that. Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I've actually changed the title a bit. I have been finding forms in queer life writing, and I've seized on a particular concept of queer time to pursue a few interrelated narratives for this presentation today, which I really hope will be I hope it will be interesting. What I hope more than anything is that I hope it will be coherent and understandable. It's my first ever PowerPoint presentation, and I might have overdone the illustrated aspect, but anyway, bear with me and forgive. Thank you. Now, for those of you that came in after 2 minutes past, you missed the song Tom Robinson Band from 1978, Glad to Be Gay. I'm just mentioning that fantastically powerful, angry political song that I was playing because it does feature in this presentation. So, Doom and Trauma, a materialist life writing adventure in queer time, and that's what I'm presenting to you today. So I'm at the very beginning of my part-time research, and my aim is to develop a creative life writing project which uses a Marxist historical materialist framework to explore internal, individualized and external experiences of queer sexuality, both of which to me constitute the social, in Britain in the 1970s, alongside a literary critical strand which examines the fiction of the novelist Elizabeth Taylor and David Story. I'm beginning by reading, as a Marxist activist, temporality collisions between my early life memorizations, or the way I remember and tell my memories, and early perceptions of queer sexuality with coterminous events from adulthood. I'm using the concept of queer time not only to recognize and interpret my life events that are resistant to conventional temporalities, but also to apply this to this process itself. That is, of reading, aggregating and redistributing and presenting these experiences by reading back in my own time and finding opportunities to disentangle individualized personal disturbances and find a historical materialist method of understanding their social and political meanings. So this is the 1976 Gay Pride March going up Regent Street in the borough of Westminster. Looks like they had a celebration at the City Council offices, which I find quite surprising. The first Pride event in the UK was in 1970, and that was a small march of 150 people in Highbury Fields, and that was a year following the Stonewall riots, which was the uprising against police persecution of the LGBT community in Greenwich Village in New York. So we're looking at the fourth official Pride event in the UK and ever. Okay. Now this is also 1976, and this is my year school photo, part of it. The blue arrow is pointing at me, and the red arrow is pointing at my best friend, Tamsin. It's at the end of my O-level year. The O-levels were the exam that we used to have before GCSEs. And I went to Wycombe High School in High Wycombe, which is the school, it's an all girls, and it was virtually all white, grammar school, selective grammar school, as I say, in High Wycombe, which is in Buckinghamshire, home county. And this is a photograph of the part of town called Frogmore in the town of High Wycombe. And it's where a cinema called the Palace Cinema used to be. This is a picture of me speaking in Frogmore in 2017 at the first ever High Wycombe Pride March. Now, Jack Halberstam in his book In a Queer Time and Place says queer uses of time and space develop in opposition to the institutions of family, heterosexuality and reproduction. Queerness itself is an outcome of strange temporalities, imaginative life schedules. He argues that this resistant form of chronology is inflected by time warping experiences as diverse as coming out, gender transitions, and generation defining tragedies such as the AIDS epidemic. So I conclude that a specific dimension of queerness is characterized by its difference from conventional imperatives of time. Now, the concept of gay and homosexual was known to me. My dad called it queer in a not complimentary way, and it made him shudder to think about it. To me, it was something that happened in London, probably in that hot, panting place called Soho, under neon lights late at night. And gay pride marches like this, and they were probably shown briefly on the television or perhaps in the newspaper, they seemed to me to be intrusive and sexualized. They seemed to be urgent and strident, hungry and insistent, and I imagined that the people on them were urgently seeking the satisfaction of their strange desires. Now, there's a close-up of me with Tamsin. Now, Tamsin used to go with her parents every summer holiday to a music camp on a farm near High Wycombe called Piggott's. It's Piggott's Farm, and the music camp was an annual event that she used to go to. And there she became, oh, and this is, whoops, oh. Right, so hold that. So she goes to this music camp at this farm. And I've got some thoughts here about queer time and queer identity. So proto-gay children often, this is from Catherine Bon Stockton's The Queer Child or Growing Sideways in the 20th Century. Proto-gay children often do not make sense of their desires, pleasures or experiences as gay until they are older. Since they are gay children only after childhood, they never are what they latently were. So what are gay children when they are children? To some extent, they are ghosts, unable to corporeally occupy who they may later find themselves to be. So this is Piggott's, the music camp, which Tamsin used to go to. And there she became friends with lots of people, but including these musical men who were what she called very camp, something that she found lovely that had nothing to do with sex or romantic relationships, but just friendship. At first, I thought it just meant they intensely embodied some quality that was only available to those who attended the music camp. I didn't know the other meaning of the word camp. Now, I never went to Piggott's. My family holidays were claustrophobic experiences in a caravan on campsites with few amenities. And that's my mum sunbathing. Now, Piggott's had been founded as an arts colony originally by the sculptor Eric Gill. And there he is carving a quite famous work, stonework at BBC Broadcasting House. Now for Gill, the virile power of the male body was a continued source of fascination. And his sexual abuse of his two daughters became public knowledge in the 1990s. He died in 1940. One of my chosen authors for critical study, the novelist Elizabeth Taylor, was also a regular visitor in the 1930s to Piggott's, where as a teenager she modelled for the abuser and sculptor Eric Gill. And her novel, The Wedding Group, is based on her experiences there. And I want to insert here a thought that I've had, that artistic work by people who experience unease and a sense of misplacement or misfitting with chromonormativity might, and what I mean there is people who adopt or embrace or experience queer time, might intentionally explore or unavoidably reflect a queer relationship to time, such as the process of adulting. In 1976, I wasn't aware of the existence of the feminist magazine Spare Rib. This is the September 1976 issue. And I would probably have thought that it was very sensible for the courts to take away the children of abnormal lesbian mothers. I wasn't aware either of this pub in the nearby town of Aylesbury publicising an official monthly gay night. And you might have a look at the bottom. It says the landlord, Mr. Graham Wilkes, is allowing only regular customers and regular gays into the homosexual get-together. So I'm not quite sure who the irregular gays were that weren't going to be allowed, but anyway. Here I am again at the first ever Pride March in High Wycombe in 2017. To my amazement, this march was organised by students from my old school, Wycombe High School. And it was organised by teachers from Buckinghamshire NUT, National Union of Teachers, which is now the National Education Union. So they've got their NUT banners there. And in this picture of High Wycombe Pride in 2017, you can see that it's supported by the Wycombe Labour Party, Elizabeth Taylor, the novelist that I've mentioned, lived in High Wycombe and was a member of Wycombe Labour Party. So Wycombe Pride in 2017 assembled for its pre-March rally at which I was speaking in this part of town called Frogmore, where the Palace Cinema used to be, outside which I'd experienced my first sexual kiss after my first ever date with a student from the boys' grammar school. And I'd met him playing in a brass orchestra. I used to play the trombone, and so did he, which used to rehearse at the Coal furniture factory on the industrial side of High Wycombe, where the Asian community was situated. And this is the Coal factory where I used to go to band rehearsals. And High Wycombe, for those who aren't aware, is a sort of historic furniture making town. Now, Donald Morton is a very important person in the history of queer critique. He really conceptualized the framework queer materialism from historical materialism. And this is an abstract from his book, Queer Materialism, that was published in 2007. Queer materialism is a recently developed concept that arose in the wake of several fundamental changes brought about by post-structural cultural theory. One was a re-understanding of materialism itself. Another was the rebalancing of the notion of the queer. In post-structuralism, the material force shaping all subjects, including queer ones, and their behaviour, is neither Epicurus's matter in motion nor Marx's economic system, but language. Whereas queer was once a term of opprobrium, as like my dad using it as an insult, it has been rebalanced through a discursive reversal, and that's often commonly termed appropriation, cultural appropriation, as a positive identity that by its very nature unsettles the normative system of gender and sexuality. Queer, moreover, has come to be used not only as a noun, but also as a verb, to queer all aspects of culture and society, all aspects of culture and society can be queered. But queer materialism points to marginal sexualities and genders as having a resistant material impact on the dominant elements of society, and in that sense, they matter. In my world, queer life in the 1970s was hidden, distorted, threatening. And I will use life writing to speculate, connect, invent, insert possible narratives within known circumstances and socio-political contexts and relations. So we're back in 1976, and this is another part of the year photograph which shows the teachers lined up at the front there. The one in the middle is the head of the school, and there they are. Now, one of my subjects that I did for O-level, and I did go on to do for A-level as well, was religious studies. And in that subject, the only religion we studied was Christianity. Our teacher, the Reverend Michael Chantry, now I'm sorry I don't have a picture of him. I've searched and searched, but I'm not able to give a photograph of him. But not only was he a religious studies teacher at the school, he was also the chaplain for 40 years in the end of Hertford College, Oxford. And there's a rather bad internet picture of Hertford College, Oxford, with all the young people there in the summer. Now I'm going to tell you about Mr. Chantry. He was my spiritual guide. He was married with 3 sons. He was a large, lumbering man who wore a dog collar with greasy looking black pullovers and black trousers. His hands were broad with fine tips, and they mauled his Bible, satchel and crushed up coat like Bear's Paws. That year, 1976, he confided some of his private thoughts to our O-level group. 3 of these thoughts stand out in my memory. The first was about a teenager he and his wife were sheltering. This young woman couldn't live with her parents because she had what he called a homosexual problem. And again, a number of relationships that were by no means over. He asked us to pray for her that she might find a happier and more normal way of life. The second memory was Mr. Chantry's stated endorsement to our class of 15 and 16-year-old girls of penetrative sexual intercourse within the holy state of matrimony. And I hope I don't have to remind everybody that in 1976 that was only open to heterosexuals. This he described as part of the man passing into the woman, as a fulfillment of the divine purpose, which he personally found deeply normal and spiritually satisfying. And the third thought I'm going to tell you about in a bit. 2 years later, Mr. Chantry invited my friend Shirley and me, and we'd both been part of his A-level group, to say goodbye by having tea at his house in the country near Oxford. And what he promised was to share a cream horn or 2. I now wonder if he had expected us to bring the cream horns, because what we were given was half a tomato sandwich each, made in front of us on the dining room table as we all sat round it together by Mr. Chantry, the sliced white bread pressed together with his broad bear's paws that were a bit red at the time. Now, Mrs. Chantry was a small, tired-looking woman without makeup and untidy hair, who left the room when we arrived without a word, but just a sort of wild cry. After we'd had our sandwich, Mr. Chantry's eldest son, Richard, went past the door, and Mr. Chantry called him in to show him off to us. He was good-looking, all right. Long, wild, curly hair, bell-bottom jeans and a t-shirt, clothing which was impossibly cool for the likes of Shirley and me. He said hello, impeccably good-natured and friendly, but keen to go on his way. He was wearing a badge. Mr. Chantry said, "Your badge, TRB, what does that mean?" Richard patted the badge and replied, "Tom Robinson Band," and exited the room. Mr. Chantry chuckled patronisingly. I don't think any of us knew what the Tom Robinson Band sounded like. That was their most famous record. Then Mr. Chantry made me and Shirley hold his hands, his bear's paws, while he prayed over us to ask for help to be given to us in our future work for God and being women. And if Mr. Chantry had had his way, I wouldn't be here or anywhere I have been in my life since the age of 18, because in 1977 he attempted to persuade me to apply to Hertford College to study theology. The third thought that Mr. Chantry shared with his O-level group was that the leader of the opposition at the time, Margaret Thatcher, was a good Christian who would look after us all very nicely if she got elected, but that Mick McGahey, the communist and vice president of the National Union of Mine Workers, the NUM, the union that had brought down the previous Tory government in 1974, was evil. Here's Mick McGahey with Arthur Scargill. Why was I at High Wycombe Pride in 2017? So my family had left the area in 1990. I went as a speaker from a group called Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, which had raised money for the South Wales coal miners during the 1984 to 85 NUM strike. The story of this group had been made into a feature film called Pride in 2014. I just wondered if anyone has seen the film Pride. Sorry about this picture. People might shout out because I can't see the chat, unfortunately. So it sounds like, yes. Did somebody say yes?
Yes, yes, I have.
Yes, one person.
Two people.
Two people?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Three? A few people have seen it. Okay, great. Thank you. So that's the actor who portrayed the communist Mark Ashton, who at the age of 23 had formed the group Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners. Now, such was the enthusiasm around this film about the LGBT support for the miners' strike in 1984 and 1985. There were so many requests for speakers from the original group that the original members of LGSM regrouped to respond to invitations from Pride events, community screenings, trade union campaign meetings, school and college sessions that were taking place all over the UK and internationally. Because our story was one of unconditional solidarity with workers and people in struggle. And people really wanted to hear that. That's a photograph I took of the real Mark Ashton. And that's the real Reggie and Ray in 1985. These are from 1985 Pride in London. And it was the first time that Pride had been a civil rights protest, and Mark Ashton was very instrumental in calling for everyone to attend this Pride March. And you may know that South Wales miners actually led the march. So, oh, and that's me on that Pride with Steph. So the Wycombe High students, you see some of them on the left, who were organising the first ever Wycombe Pride in 2017, got in touch with LGSM asking for a speaker. So my return to the town was a coincidental fold in time. And the emotional affect of that day is a narrative in itself too broad and too deep for this particular PowerPoint presentation. I coped with the overwhelming feelings of, I suppose, grief and healing by doing a collection for striking McDonald's workers. The novelist Elizabeth Taylor had died a year before the beginning of our talk today, in 1975. A lot happened in the 6 years for me between Mr. Chantry's faithful farewell and my activism in Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners. I came out as queer to my mother 4 years later in 1982. She told me she thought she didn't want to be my mother anymore. So I'm going to end with a new theoretical beginning, taking as a methodological starting point Lisa Lowe's words from her book, The Intimacies of Four Continents. Past conditional temporality, a space of productive attention to the scene of loss a thinking with twofold attention that seeks to encompass at once the positive objects and methods of history and social science, and also the matters absent, entangled, and unavailable by its methods. And I'll just leave you with the that image again. It's a whole other presentation that will be based around this image, and that's the end. So I'm gonna hopefully now hopefully escape from here. Yes, I think I've come back to you. Have I come back to you, Kate?
Yes, you have. You're back to us. You were there in a small form the whole time, but you're there. You're back to us full screen, or full screen for me anyway.
Okay, I'm back with you then. That's
yes. It. So we'll open this up to questions and discussion. You can see the chat now, can you, Nicola?
Yes, I can. Yes, yes. Oh, yes. Thank you, everybody.
So does anyone have any questions or comments or points for discussion that they'd like to raise?
I want to ask, well, first of all, thank you so much, Nicola. That was so interesting, and I related to so much of it. And but I wanted to ask the drawing, the illustration. What does it come from? What is it?
It is a drawing I did, which is expressing, I suppose, not just how I felt as a young person, but I think how I felt all my life, about trying to chase some kind of integration.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's a drawing I did with oil pastels about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I should say that my life writing will incorporate visual writing.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a life writing method that I'll be pursuing. And I was thinking I was going to make that the subject of this presentation, but I'm afraid I just went off down the road with Mr. Chantry and the bear's paws, and I couldn't help it. But I'm at the stage in my research where I can afford to follow my nose, I hope.
Have you read Michael Warner? So you probably have. So I'm just going to mention, because the drawing and what it says, that chasing the normal and what is normal anyway, made me think of Michael Warner's book, The Trouble with Normal.
The Trouble with Normal, yeah. I think I've read little bits of it. Thank you for that. It's yeah. Itzy. Thanks, Itzy. It's really. Thank you so much for your. I'm going to tap that in the chat because I'll be able to access it later. I can use it as a place to make notes. Thank you so much, Itzy.
Thank you.
I hope we can continue discussing things at another time.
And we have a hand up from Spike. Would you like to unmute and?
Okay. Yes, I'm unmuted. Hi, Nicola. Thanks for your talk. That was really fascinating and resonated with a lot of my own history and past, and maybe we have various connections.
I think we might.
Yeah, like Chris Birch, and because I think Chris Birch was friends with them.
Yes.
Mark, that's right. Yeah. So and Andrew Lumsden and all that lot.
Yeah.
And Lisa Power. So that's kind of been life writing is new to me. I've just began a week ago doing my PhD, and I think Sarah's sitting listening to this. Sarah's been trying to introduce me the thought of life writing. I've never come across the concept before. Where do you start? life writing. Yeah.
Well, where I've started is with not wanting to remain in an individualized, privatized experience. I've written a lot through my life about my experiences, relationships, processes, artistic processes, emotional processes, therapy process, you know, written a lot, reflecting. I've got millions of notebooks. But I think what has made me want to do life writing in this formal context, you know, to actually do research, is to find a form of life writing, or find ways of life writing which link my individual experiences to the social and political context, and reintroduce the reality of the social into the personal. And you know, I always think with sexuality, with mental distress, depression, sense of alienation, all these conditions which we experience so individually, are social experiences in which we are not alone, because many other people are experiencing them, but we feel that we are alone in them. There's a contradiction there. So for me, I'm starting with that dialectical approach to life writing as a political way of understanding the world. I hope that is somewhere, but I mean, regarding where do you start? I'll tell you what, I've been searching, you know, I've been doing Google searches, I've been looking at life writing departments in different universities, and just jumping on anything that could be seen as life writing, whether it's art, you know, visual art or literary, and just learning and getting all sorts of thoughts and ideas. So I'd be happy to have a chat sometime, and we can sort of share ideas and resources that we've come across.
That'd be great. I'd really appreciate that, as I'm still new to the this way of thinking. So but yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I love Tom Robinson's Glad to Be Gay. I think I've certainly used it in performances, and my partner Nick often says it was one of the most important campaign songs, one of the first. And people forget that the Tom Robbins band was campaign band. Yeah.
Well, it was, I think what I thought today, playing it today as we were coming in, for those that did hear it, it's about the hypocrisy, brutality, sexism, homophobia and racism of the police, and is so relevant to play very loudly on every street corner at the moment.
Yeah, I was fortunate to see him at one of the prides on the South Bank in the early 80s. So
yeah,
it was fabulous. Anyway, I'm sure other people want to ask a question, but thank you. Well, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Good to meet you.
Also, can I mention? It's not a question, but can I comment? Can I know that I'm a visual artist, and let's call it self-biographical work is very frowned upon. About 10, 12 years ago, I was at an art residency in Spain, and one of the tutors, one of the artists talking to us, told me in a very derisive way, "Oh, I bet your work is all about you," which obviously was meant in a negative way.
Yes,
Just
yes.
saying.
Yeah, well, you get people who think that life writing and writing the self are sort of navel gazing, self-absorbed exercises. And then you get people who think that you can find out about the world through life writing. And I'm just very glad to be in the second category.
Well, you can only work about the things, with the things that you know. And your own life and your own experience, so when you mention about, the social, how your work gets into the social, or the social invades your, your own personal experience, that's very important. Yeah, one thing that is missing a lot. I heard this on a podcast the other day, especially now that politics and activism is so, there is so much of it, and I think it's a good thing. She said there is very little, everybody's reading theory and how-to books, but nobody's reading biographies, or, how these politics actually happened in the real world, how they were translated into real people's lives.
I think it's really, it's really important to have, to me, a historical materialist approach to change, political change, struggle, and so on. And what I am so grateful for now is the opportunity to read that, because I've been a political activist for 40 years, to read that experience and process as a socio-political methodology, rather than, to understand where change comes from. And one of the biggest parts of my research through the critical literary aspect and the life writing is to look at the structural role of the family in capitalist society and what role it plays. And that, to me, is the fundamental underlying capitalist institution from which sexual oppression, gender oppression arise.
I agree.
Yeah, so that's why I'm so committed to it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We've got some interesting connections going on in the chat with people sharing resources, and I think we've made a few connections between different people working on similar things here. So that's what these sessions are supposed to be all about. So does anyone else have questions or comments or anything else they would like to ask or add? You can type it in the chat, or you can unmic and speak. We've got a few minutes left if we need it. Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, we can wrap up the session there, and thank Nicola very much for her talk. Do the little clapping thing that my students do. And we'll close off just by saying that there's another session next week. I'm just about to post details of that into the chat. This is at the slightly later time of 1 till 2 p.m. next Friday, where Albert Pellicer will be talking to us about his PhD work, the Sonology of the Unheard, the Poetics of Timbre. So Albert is a poet and writer, and he's working on his PhD at the moment. So please come along next week. So it's 1 o'clock next week rather than 2, so that everybody can go to the festival research events that are happening in the morning, and hope to see as many of you as possible then. So let's finish off by thanking Nicola once again. People are doing that in the chat, lots of thank yous and how much they enjoyed your talks coming through. So that's really good. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you.
try to stop the recording, but too many thank you messages are coming through. It keeps covering up my stop button. There you go.